Welcome to another episode of Game of Life with Dan and Harmon. It's just Dan here today. I'm so thrilled to be joined by a musical theatre superstar, Nigel Huckle. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Now, you've currently been on tour, international tour,
Yes.
with Miss Saigon. How has that been for you?
It has been more than I expected.
Yeah.
We've been going for, it'll be 15 months by the time we finish Singapore at the end of September. And I think it's just been filled with so many different experiences because in Australia, you have one way that you tour and you know, you're at home, so you know sort of what is accessible to you. And, you know, if you're going through something, then you know where to find what you need to sort of fix it. And then on international tour, it's amazing because you see these brilliant, beautiful places and beautiful people who welcome you with open arms. But there's also that side of the uncertainty in being in a new place. And so there's all that balancing of how you make that work with your performance schedule and how you build a routine. And so, you know, we've had part in Australia, part international, and it's the longest contract I've ever done, certainly. But it's just been full of really amazing experiences and challenges. And but you know, those challenges create opportunities and shape you into the performer you are. So yeah, amazing experience.
Do you get homesick?
Homesick, yes. I think it's more just like, if, you know, because sometimes I'll be struggling with my voice or going through something else, and I'm like, in Australia, I know where to go to like get this to make me feel better. And then, but when you're in a new place, like, especially in Taiwan, which was incredible, but we were doing a different city every week, and the language barrier is an issue. So, you know, sometimes going to the chemist and finding something is a bit more challenging than in Australia. So I don't know if it's homesickness or if it's just the certainty and the assuredness of getting what you need. But you know, it's just part of the experience.
I know for performers, if you are, you know, having difficulties with, you know, vocal performance, there's a doctor you can go to. How does it work on tour? If you're struggling vocally, is there someone that sort of travels with the company to help you through those struggles?
Not so much travels with us, but you know, our company management is in very close partnership with the local promoters. And so, you know, I had some issues in Taiwan because of just how much we were changing environments and changing cities every week. And when we got to Taipei, I was able to see someone and they talked me off a ledge and it was all fine. But, you know, like I have a great ENT and voice team here in Melbourne. And when you're kind of far away from that, your mind tends to go like, what am I doing wrong? And how do I fix this immediately? But everyone, there is a team to support you wherever you go. And there's always that access to what you need.
Does it take a while to settle in from city to city?
I think, okay, just the experience with Taiwan was unlike anything I've ever done. So we basically arrived in Taiwan. We had the week off while the crew were bumping in. And then we had a Friday afternoon tech, Friday night show, double show Saturday, double show Sunday. And the Sunday matinee would be at 11 a.m. So that we would do at 11 and a 4 p.m. so that the crew had sort of a humane hour to bump out and go to the next city. And we would do it all over again. And I think just that going from 0 to 100 experience was a shock to my voice, to my body. And, you know, I struggled for a couple of weeks to make it through. Like Sunday, I had to go off mid-show, the first show. And then the following Sunday, I couldn't even come to work at all on that Sunday. And so then I had to be like, okay, maybe I need to build in some practice time in my room so that I can build my stamina and like an on-ramp into the weekend. And that worked really well. So that's what I mean when I talk about like challenges and then you learn and you overcome them. But it's all just a huge learning curve and experience.
I've had quite a few musical theatre performers on the podcast, and I'm constantly amazed with the injuries or illness people push through to get through a show. Have you had to push through any injuries or illness to get through these shows?
I don't know about push through because you know, I have two covers in Miss Saigon, and they're very close friends of mine and super supportive. And generally, when you're going through an issue, company management and our music director are always really supportive about figuring out what do we need to make this better. And honestly, it's usually a bit of rest.
Right.
And that's, I mean, people ask all the time, like, what's the magic bullet for getting your voice back? And it's rest and water. That's it. You know, there's nothing else. I mean, like, anti-inflammatories and all this sort of extra stuff can help, but really it's just about getting adequate rest.
Yeah.
And the thing is, no other genre of performer is asked to do what we do. You know, opera singers sing about 4 times a week at most. Pop singers, if you think about Taylor Swift's schedule, she did 3 shows in Melbourne, and then she had the next week off, and then she did 4 shows in Sydney, and you know what I mean? So
These people don't really think about that, do they? I mean,
no.
Yeah,
They're
you're doing 8 shows a week
on 2 little tiny pieces of skin that are about the size of your fingernail. That's how the vocal folds work.
Yeah.
So they were never designed to do 8 shows a week,
Right.
like that. And you know, that's how we're asked to perform, and you know, it's a job, and you rock up, and hopefully you're paid to do the job. And but you also have, there is support to manage when you can't make it through, or you need adjustment or something, you know. Yeah.
I was telling you before we started that I saw Miss Saigon for the very first time ever at the end of last year, November, here in Melbourne, and I didn't know what to expect going in. I didn't realize it was going to be sung all the way through. I didn't realize how, you know, full on it was. I didn't realize how dramatic it was, because I have a tendency to, you know, go towards the comedy musicals.
Yes.
Did you know much about the show when you got onto it?
Well, what I always say is that every young tenor in drama school and in musical theater school, they all learn Why God Why and do it at a jury or some sort of recital. And so I knew about Miss Saigon early on in my sort of learning about musical theater. And I think in theater spheres, it's known because it's the same composers as Les Mis. But I would understand, I mean, a lot of the general public come in and they're like, wow, you know, I've never heard of this show. And but then you sit and you watch it, and you're overwhelmed in ways by the drama and by just what an epic force it is as a piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did the show in 2014 in a little theater in Colorado. So I did it 10 years ago. And I played Chris.
Wow.
And it was at a much smaller scale than what I'm doing now. Yeah. But I think, you know, that helped me get into it, was just having the music in my bones already. And these sort of, like, I guess we would call it contemporary legit, like the big blockbusters that are like Phantom, Les Mis, Cats, like those ones, especially that came from the UK. That's the kind of stuff that my voice really likes. So yeah, I knew it, and I was prepared to go in and grab it by the horns.
You mentioned blockbuster there, and that's like a great way of describing Miss Saigon. It is a blockbuster musical. It was like watching a film.
Yeah, I mean, and it ran on Broadway for 10 years. And I think people wouldn't realize, like, it was such a massive hit when it came out, when, you know, it came out on Broadway in 91, and then it ran until, I think, 2000, 2001. It did something like 10,000 performances. I think it's now the 14th longest running musical in Broadway history.
That's crazy.
So it had an early following and an early cult following, and when we toured to Manila with the show, it's so part of Filipino culture because of Lea Salonga and other people that have other Filipinos who have done the show. So yeah, just to be part of an epic piece like that is wild.
How have the fan reactions been overseas compared to that in Australia?
So the Philippines is distinct in its appreciation for Miss Saigon. I think, you know, there were barricades outside the stage door because people just line up and they come to greet you with smiles and appreciation, And what was so cool was just how moved people were by the piece. And it's similar in Australia, but I think celebrity culture is a bit more mellow here in Australia than it is in the Philippines.
Right.
But I would go to the mall and about every other time I went shopping while we were in Manila, someone would stop me and ask me for a photo. And it was beautiful that people were so moved by the show.
Yeah.
But then it was completely different when we went to Taiwan, because there are surtitles in Chinese. And so sometimes some of the things take a few seconds to land, or culturally they're not sure if they're allowed to be a bit boisterous in the audience. And there were times where it was quieter than we were used to during the show, but then at the curtain call, it was a massive reception. So I guess because we do live theater, because of that sort of immediate response, it takes an adjustment.
Right.
Going from city to city and culture to culture. So very much peaks and valleys in terms of vocal reception to the show, but always really appreciative at the curtain calls.
I was talking to someone recently on the podcast. I can't remember who, and I can't remember what show it was, but they were doing a show in Japan, and they sort of noted how polite the audiences were compared to here in Australia.
Yeah,
where they actually sort of wait to applause, and they their reactions are very sort of stagnated.
Yes. Yeah, and I would say I often impress in Taiwan especially. I was like, don't be shy, and we would don't feel like you have to be polite or because it is that relationship. I mean, the audience in live theater really is part of the show.
Right.
And I think every performer would be lying if they said like, oh, the audience reaction didn't shape how the show, that particular performance evolved and ran. So, yeah, I mean, I would certainly encourage Australian audiences to stay nice and boisterous and responsive. And but as shows travel overseas and a lot of Australian companies go overseas, maybe we'll see a shift, but either way, it's nice at the curtain call to know that the show's been appreciated.
How comfortable were you with getting the attention from fans?
That is such a great question. Because, I didn't really experience that much of it in Australia, because, again, you leave stage door in Australia and you see a few people, particularly people that have come to support you, and you say hello and thanks for coming.
And we don't really have barricades.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
even on opening nights or closing nights, we don't really have that.
I think the Opera House too, because you exit stage door under the big, the big area that then leads out, is people don't really gather a lot there.
No.
Compared to Her Majesty's Theatre in Melbourne, where we would see a lot of people afterwards, but
it seems more accessible, the stage door here, than it would in Sydney. I wouldn't even know where the stage door in Sydney is.
Yeah. But then in the Philippines was, I think, my first sort of taste of what it is like to be, part of a show like that is so culturally significant. And I think for the first couple weeks, it was like, wow, people really love the show and they really love us as performers. And then a few weeks later, people would come up to us at the hotel while we're eating breakfast and want to get photos, and it's so lovely and so nice to be appreciated that way. But I'm like, I just rolled out of bed. I can't do this. I can't quite put on a smile yet when I haven't had my coffee and I'm still eating my scrambled eggs. And so I think we sort of all had to have a conversation and be like, okay, when is it appropriate for us to be inviting, and when is it then appropriate for us to expect an element of privacy,
right? Especially
in the place where we live, where we're away from home, we're in our hotel. So it was definitely an adjustment, and after a few weeks, I knew what to expect, but I'm very much a person of routine,
right?
And so if I'm on a mission hunting for someone and I see someone and they're like, oh my gosh, hello. Like they stop for a conversation. At first I have to G myself up and be like, oh, right, okay, hello, like, nice to see you.
Yeah.
But it all just comes down to how much people appreciate the show, and that's what really matters is that we've moved people, especially in a show like this. Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned that Singapore is the last stop
Yes.
on the tour. How do you think you're going to feel when it all ends? Because you said it's been your longest contract so far.
I've thought about it. Abby and I have certainly said, how are we going to make it through our final Sun and Moon together? You know, I think if I think back to my Les Mis experience, and we did it in Singapore as well, and we weren't quite finished when we finished Singapore, but I remember being at the curtain call like in tears, like really, really emotional. And I think there's an element of, well, unemployment's coming up now, and there's an element of finality to it. And I think that'll certainly be a part of finishing the show in Singapore. I will say I think there'll be a tiny element of relief in the way that the show has been an amazing burden, and I don't mean burden to sound negative, but it's just been such a massive thing to hold up and huge, you know, learning and adapting experience for my voice and my body and my psyche, that I think on that last show there will be a huge element of pride in completing the job. You know, pride and relief that I for a little while won't have to wake up and be like, is it all there? And but it is such a legacy piece to be part of. This year celebrates 35 years since Miss Saigon opened on the West End.
Yeah.
So to be part of a show that huge is such a legacy, privilege, and honor. But to finish it will be both, just a huge element of pride and a little bit of relief too, I think.
I mean, the show requires a lot. I imagine it's quite emotionally draining as well.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of emotion involved in that piece. And again, I mean, I've talked about this before on the podcast, but you form all these close-knit relationships, and especially when you're on tour, when you're going from city to city with each other.
Yeah.
Does that ever get easier, sort of saying goodbye to, you know, people you form these bonds with, and then, you know, having to start over again on another show?
Yeah. I mean, even if I think about the cast change during Miss Saigon, like after Sydney and Melbourne, quite a handful of our fellow castmates left, and as we went into Adelaide and the Asia tour, we had new people to work with, and of course, working with new people is amazing and exciting. But just that, if I think about that sensation of losing people who were so part of the beginning, you know, we would just had the seeds of the show as we started rehearsals for a 7-week rehearsal process, really long, and then all of Sydney and Melbourne. Yeah, I mean, finishing the show in its entirety and separating from your friends and colleagues. I mean, what's exciting about these experiences is that you do make friends for your whole career and for your life because of how intimately you share the stage together. And, you know, I think about Abby's and my relationship. We've got quite an age difference, but we've formed a closeness in how closely we've worked on stage that, you know, I'm so excited for whatever she does next. I'll be a bit envious because I'm like, well, you're not allowed to be in a show without me. Yeah. That's weird. But I think about times where I'll sit in an audience and see her in a show, or she'll do the same thing for me, or for me to see Sean or you know, Nick or Lewis, like or anyone that I've worked with. There is an element that like I did something big with them. Yeah.
I imagine, I mean, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and start hustling again and auditioning again. Is there a part of you where you sort of feel, oh, do I remember how to do that?
Well, I've had to do it for the past couple of weeks, actually. And it has been, an interesting look in. But I think if I remember before the show, I've always only ever booked jobs that I know that I'm right for and that I have prepared immensely for. And I think oftentimes, especially in Australia where the auditions come pretty infrequently, there's a tendency to like really want to fit yourself into what's coming next so that you know that you have a job.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is I just don't think that's how it really works if you get to the bottom of it.
Of course.
And you'll only ever really book a job that is right for you, and what's for you will not pass you. And so I saw an Instagram post a couple days ago about like 7 signs that you're changing and growing. And the first one is that you've embraced uncertainty.
Right.
So I don't have a job to look forward to after Miss Saigon. And part of me is really at peace with that. And another part of me is trying to make peace with that. But I'm grateful that this show has put me in a position where I sort of don't have to panic for a sec. And this is the first experience that I've had of that.
Yeah.
That I could maybe even take a few weeks to a month off and just reflect on the experience. But I'm confident that if I'm just patient, as I have been for 33 years, which led me to Miss Saigon and the jobs that I've had before that, you know, another one will come up and it's going to be just as satisfying and fulfilling.
How long are the breaks in between going from city to city?
In Australia, they were about two weeks long, like in between Sydney and Melbourne, and then Melbourne and Adelaide, they were 2 weeks long. But because in Asia, they have to freight the set to, you know, to each place. I think between Adelaide and Manila, it was like 5 or 6 weeks. And then Taiwan was only 2 weeks before. And then this break is 4 or 5 weeks. And I'm lucky that I'm doing a concert in Manila next week, and which is exciting and nice that it sort of fits in this break, and something that I would like to do more often to support myself in between jobs.
Is this the first time you've done a concert like this?
Yeah. On definitely on this scale, you know, I'm performing with 3 other international soloists. Abby's one of them. And then, you know, we do 2 nights of shows in Manila. Yeah, I would love to do more of it because it's a really fun experience, and, you know, it is really financially supportive in those in-between periods. And oftentimes you're singing music that does fit you and that you feel that you love singing, you know.
At what point, you know, during those periods where you have time off, are you, you know, okay with? Meaning, you know, can you take 1 week off without feeling a sense of guilt that you're not working? Or can you take 2 weeks off without a sense of guilt of not working?
I will be honest with you that I have not had that experience of not being able, like not having to work in between. So before Miss Saigon, I worked in hospitality in between jobs. And honestly, cumulatively working in hospitality, I would say like at least 5 years.
Yeah.
And so I grew to enjoy it and get good at it. I even got a wine qualification because I was like, you know what, if I'm going to do this as often, then I want to get good at it and enjoy it. But this will be the first sort of experience where I don't necessarily have to do that. And I think now that I've created a sense of comfort in the Australian industry, I would like to do things that are more industry adjacent, like teaching. I think I really would have a lot to offer because teachers have filled my cup, and I would love to pass that on. So finding a sort of combination of things that are creatively fulfilling that sustain you in between big jobs, that's sort of my next frontier.
Yes.
And not something necessarily that I have done before, but that I'm excited to prepare. But I think Miss Saigon's put me in a position where I might have a month or 2 to 4 weeks where I could just sit back and relax, have a break, give my voice a break, give my body a break. Again, like give myself mentally and emotionally a break. We'll see how that pans out.
When you went back to those hospitality jobs in between not working as a performer, did your ego ever get the better of you and think, why am I doing this hospitality job? I was just performing only a couple of weeks ago.
Honestly, often.
Yeah.
And because I've lived between Australia and the US.
Yeah.
In Australia, it's a bit more difficult because I think when you work in hospitality, the outside view is that either you're studying or you haven't found anything that you're successful at.
Yeah.
And so I would often be, inquired about like, oh, so are you studying? And I'm like, no, I'm an actor. And they're like, and I would say like, I went to an audition, and they'd be like, oh, that's cute. That's really cute that you're auditioning. And it would really weigh on my ego, if I'm being completely honest. And even one time, I did Hello Dolly with the production company, and I played Barnaby. And I
Shout out
finished
to the production company, by the way. I'm so annoyed that it's no longer a thing anymore.
I know, and
I love their shows.
They shaped so many careers, so many young Australian careers, including mine. And actually, a couple of the producers in the production company came to see Miss Saigon, and it was lovely for them to say like how proud they were of me, and I'm sure they've had that many experiences with seeing other production company alums doing big commercial productions. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
But after I finished Hello Dolly, I went to work at a cafe literally within that week. And I had a couple of customers that were like, are you an actor? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, were you just in Hello Dolly? And I was like, yes, I was. Yeah. And they were like, we loved it. Like, you did a great job. And what's coming up next? And I'm like, well, I don't know. That's kind of why I'm here. So I think I would say it was a difficult hurdle to overcome.
Of course.
That's in Australia. But in the US, if you do it in New York, if you work in hospitality in New York and you're an actor, it is completely understood and respected that you have to sustain yourself in between jobs.
It's so expected over there, whereas I think here people will be like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
such this weird perception of, well, if you've been in a big musical, why do you need to go back to working in a retail hospitality?
Yeah, exactly. And I think other performers would struggle with that bit of ego as well. But again, in New York, like I was working at a nice pizza restaurant in the West Village, and when I got the job, all my colleagues were like, "This is amazing. I know this is about to change your life," and all that sort of stuff. And you also work with fellow actors too, right. So it has its different circumstances. If I were to be moving straight back to New York after Saigon, then I'd have a different experience or a different sort of expectation of what I would be doing to get myself to the next job. But I do want to relax in Australia for the summer. And so I don't know that hospitality is necessarily for me to get back into after having this experience.
Yeah. Take me back in time a little bit. What did a young Nigel want to be growing up?
Well, young Nigel sang a lot of Whitney Houston around the house. And mom said that she had all sorts of people tell her that this kid is going to be on a stage. But I also, growing up in the U.S., like being an immigrant in the U.S., because I was born in Australia, there was an affinity for that sense of belonging. And I remember I would do my history classes, and in high school we took politics and government. And one of our assignments was to volunteer for a presidential campaign. So I clocked like 20 hours working on the 2008 Obama campaign.
Oh, really?
And so there was a time where I was interested in law. So that was something I was really keen on. But in high school, I was part of a performing arts sort of ensemble. And sort of junior year came about, that's third year in high school. And I was debating between like, do I do political science so that I could eventually go to law school, and then I had a friend pull me aside one day and they were just like, you have to do this as a career. Like you have enough to do it. And I think for someone else to believe in me that much was sort of a sign that was like, okay, right. I can do this. And so I did a Bachelor of Musical Theater at Shenandoah Conservatory in Northern Virginia, and sort of just went from there.
Yeah. So did you have the confidence as a performer, or did that take a while to come?
Honestly, I think I had more confidence as a young performer than I
Mm.
do sometimes today, because I think there is that fearlessness when you're young.
Of course.
Um,
And some naivety as well.
yes,
Yes.
yeah, I think there's a fearlessness. You have a greater sense of imagination when you're younger, and the self-doubt sort of creeps up as you begin to think that I could be doing this as a profession.
Right.
So yeah, I did have confidence as a young performer. And sort of finding a way to harness that was part of the challenge in developing into a professional.
Yeah. Is there a moment you can pinpoint pretty early on where you thought to yourself, "Oh, okay, this can be a career"?
Um, I don't know that there's one moment, but in college, when I was doing my musical theater degree, I had experiences where you often work in the summers between your years at conservatory, and I was lucky enough that I worked professionally every summer, and I got a lot of feedback from people that I worked with that was like, if you ever have self-doubt, or if you ever think that you're not gonna make it, put that away, because you are. And I guess validation is one sort of area, and I think it works in tandem with sort of self-confidence. And the validation is great and nice, and I think I carried that into a feeling of like, okay, great. I love auditioning, and I love pursuing, and I love trying to get the job. And that self-confidence was sort of the thing that I had to build and take with me.
Rejection can certainly tear down that confidence. Did it take you a while to develop a thick skin?
Yeah, I would say yes.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about sort of a moment, I think I was about 26 or 27 when I realized not every job is going to be for me. And there was a freedom and a liberation in that realization that I'm only going to get the jobs that I'm right for. If I try and push myself to fit something, either vocally or like look-wise, physically, just the sort of vibe.
Yeah.
If I try and force myself into something, it's not going to happen. And so what I have and what I bring to the industry and to the profession is I mean, cliche, I am enough, but but I have unique qualities that other performers have of their own. And I think of like specific things, like I like singing legit, and I like singing contemporary legit, and other people like singing contemporary and pop rock. And so we all have the ways that we fit in. And once I sort of embraced that, like, this is how my voice works. If that's not right for this show, that's fine. It will be right for another one.
Would you look at other people, your peers, for instance, and get discouraged by their success?
I don't know about discouraged, but I would say there was certainly like mounds of envy.
Yes.
But then I would think that, there would be other people that would feel maybe the same way about me, because while the road to a big commercial contract like Miss Saigon was long, it was filled with other really great jobs that came up along the way. And I think it took reminding myself that those are things to be proud of too. But I think what's unique about the musical theater industry is that we only get success by championing other people's success.
Right.
So if I was personally maybe envious, I would still be stoked for my friends and peers and people who I had got to know and got to enjoy their company. If I saw that they had booked a job, I was so excited, because they would feel the same way about me. And that's, I think, what is special about musical theater that differs from maybe other performing arts, is that we're all really, really supportive of each
Yes.
other.
So something I've sort of discovered through the course of doing this podcast, where I've had musical theatre people on, is there really is that sort of mentality of, oh, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Which I love that so much, because I mean, having one foot in the comedy world here in Australia at least are very close knit with each other.
Right.
It feels like one big family. So it's nice to sort of know that's the case in the musical theatre world here as well.
Yeah. I mean, because we all have that shared experience of sort of being broken down to be rebuilt back up in the training sphere. And then we all have that shared experience of embracing rejection and overcoming it.
Yes.
So we know what it takes to overcome it. And when we see someone else has done that, then of course you're gonna champion their success. And I think also when people go through a rejection, we all again know how it feels. So we know how to console and be there for each other and give each other. When you don't book a job, you get 24 hours to sort of wallow in it, and then it's time to pick yourself back up and look to the next thing. And it's all these unspoken rules and just how we operate as performers that makes us a special breed that sometimes we only understand of each other.
I know for me, for the longest time for me, I was so self-conscious and hard on myself with my own work. And when people would compliment me on things, like doing this podcast where people have sort of listened to an episode and said, oh, you did a really good job, there's a part of me that doesn't believe them. Are you okay with compliments? Does it take you a while to sort of, I guess, believe people that, oh yeah, if they're saying I'm good, then I must be good?
Yeah. I think I saw something once that was, when I give you a compliment and you sort of reject it or downplay it, it's like, well, I'm here to give you your flowers, and I hope that you can see it in you to accept them. Otherwise, I know, I don't quite know where I'm getting with this, but like there is a tactful way to accept compliments. And if you've reached a level where someone is validating your work, then I, find it in yourself to accept it.
Yeah.
That's one sort of thing. Like, I really appreciate when people point out that I've done good work.
Right.
But it is a thing that that element of self-doubt tells you that, oh, I don't know, they've told me this, but on the inside, I'm like, oh, but have I really lived up to what they've explained to me?
Yeah.
And it's sort of a up and down roller coaster of figuring that out, I think, because like I did this cabaret concert last week in Sydney, and that was the first time I'd done one of those in a long, long time. Normally, I just love doing Miss Saigon or any other show where everything is scripted, and I know I've done it 8 times a week. I know nothing's going to go wrong.
It's feel a lot more vulnerable when you're not doing that.
Oh my God, 100%.
Yeah.
And you're really close to an audience of your peers, and you think that they're judging you, but they're not. They're really there to support you. And I still struggle with like, well, did that performance go as well as people told me to? And there would have been a time like a year and a half ago where I maybe didn't feel as self-judgmental, and then you go into a big show and you have moments where you're like, oh no, I'm great, like I'm nailing this. And other moments where you're like, oh, I don't know if that's going as well as I think it is. And it all is just a journey, not to sound cliche about it, but it's just things that you have to work on. And I have it. I think every performer should have a team or people that they can speak to about the psyche and stuff. And we all have to have someone that we can talk to about that. Yeah. And that's the only way that we grow. But I think self-doubt is natural. And it's something that we have to manage.
I feel like I've always been that type of person that has needed a little bit of a push to do something because, I have had so much self-doubt and I have been so self-conscious. And, I started this podcast a year and a half ago with a co-host. And I think the only reason I sort of was comfortable at doing a podcast at the beginning was because I was doing it with someone else.
Yeah.
And that person was there, by my side to sort of push me along to do it. And now that he's had to take a break from the podcast this year, I'm just sort of surprised at how far I've come doing it on my own. And I don't need that push anymore to do this. It's so strange how things can just change on a dime like that.
Well, this experience today would have probably been much different than your first time hosting on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that speaks to the sort of adaptability that we have to get through as performers and as, anyone has to really. But the ability to sort of learn from your challenges is so critical to performing and entertainment and anything that's public facing, I think.
Yeah. One of the questions I really like asking on this podcast, because I think it's an interesting area, has there been a consistent negative story that you've told yourself over the course of your career that you've had to actively counteract with a positive one? For me, I did speech therapy as a kid, which is why I think I'm so self-conscious. So I would get it in my head that I could not talk to people because I did speech therapy as a kid. I can't talk to people. I don't have the confidence to talk to people. So I had to override that and say, what are you talking about? I've talked to people just fine before in the past. So of course I can talk to people. So I had to, tune out that negative voice and amplify the positive.
I think maybe this is kind of boring and specific, but growing up, my pitch was often an issue when I was singing, and I just had a teacher and a music director who, if I was singing lazily, would just yell at me like flat, like flat, you're flat. And so I think that kind of has carried through my career where I hyper judge my own singing, and I'll watch clips of myself and just be really unhappy with things that any other normal person wouldn't pick up or wouldn't hear. And then I listened to this podcast called Las Culturistas with Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang, and they went to this Patti LuPone concert, and they were like, oh, she was a bit pitchy at parts, but she's an icon. She's Patti LuPone. And then one of them said, perfect is boring.
Yeah.
And that really clicked with me, I think, because I think we're so used to hearing cast recordings that are treated and, hyper analyzed and made to sound a very specific way. And then we actually go to see a performance live, and it's not as perfect as a cast recording, but we're still moved and we're still energized by the performance. And so I think that I've had to maybe overcome that sense of perfectionism, as almost every performer has, but reminding myself that perfect is boring.
Right.
But there's nothing overtly thrilling about a perfect performance, because the parts that the imperfections are what make it shimmer.
Of course, yeah. Do you get nervous before performing?
Oh my God, all the time.
Yeah,
100%. I'm similar to what you said earlier, constantly like, why did I sign myself up for this sort of anxiety-induced profession? Yeah. But then you do get on the stage and you enjoy it and you love it. And I told my therapist once, I was like, there was a time where everything was, the only thing that seemed to be going right was doing the show.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I found a sense of stillness and appreciation, is just being on stage and doing the show. But oh my God, the lead up is just...
Right.
Not so much with Miss Saigon now that I've got 250 plus performances in the tank, and I know what to do and what to expect. But again, this like cabaret that I did, I spent all day being like, I don't know the lyrics. I'm going to mess up the lyrics. I'm going to mess this up. This is going to be so bad.
Yes.
And then actually got on stage and the lyrics were absolutely fine. And while I was up there, had a great time. So I don't know. I still have a way to go in sort of appreciating what is to come while being on the stage.
Do you have any, tricks that you try and play on yourself to get you out of that mode?
I've tried every trick in the book, I swear, and nothing really works for me except just making sure I'm prepared.
Right.
Like I'm kind of an over-rehearsed kind of person. Aside from that, I do just sort of stew in a bit of anxiety, but I think even that most recent experience was a learning opportunity to be like, hey, you can spend all day ruminating and then you're actually going to enjoy what you're about to do. So maybe I will carry that into my next experience.
Has there been a moment on stage that just has not gone well?
To be honest, I'm kind of known as a bit of a robotically consistent person. Like I will turn my head on the same lyrics and like while we're rustling about in the bed, before I Still Believe, for example, like when I'm having that nightmare, I put my knee up on the same lyrics and I toss on the same lyrics. So I don't know that on stage has been there's been anything drastic. The one that I can think of is in I would say 2012 I did the Spitfire Grill and I played Joe Sutter, the sheriff, and I was working with a couple seasoned performers, but someone dropped their lyrics on stage and then we all cascaded into dropping our lyrics, but I somehow sang lyrics that I made up on the spot that still managed to rhyme. So I don't know, that's just kind of how my brain works in a performance is I can find I find peace in the consistency, you know. Another example, I think we had an issue where the Dreamland truck on Miss Saigon was maybe going to be faulty, like the wheels weren't going to work and we were going to have to change some of the blocking, and I was like, I can't change my show. I can't change my track. Don't make me change. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Thankfully it didn't have to be adjusted, but I mean, I think I was more nervous for those sort of changes to happen than anything that's really happened on stage. Sorry, I will add one more story.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was in Melbourne. We were doing Last Night of the World, and I was facing upstage with Abby, like we were about to, do something, and I hear behind me, and I was like, what's going on? And I turn around and I look at stage management has come to put out a fire on the shrine downstage right. And we kept singing, we kept performing, even if there were a few like looks to, what are we supposed to do? But we kept going, even as they had come on stage and then left, having extinguished a fire. They had not extinguished the fire, and I heard again behind me, whoosh, and I was just like, you know what, Abby, we're leaving the stage. And stage management called it, and we stopped the show. And we were about to start again from where we had left off. And Abby and I were like, should we give them a little something? Give the audience a little something? And so we were in like a massive, like a big dip and like lips locked and a big kiss as the curtains came back up and the audience was like, yeah. And we kept going. So I don't know. There's always opportunities to make something bad into something good.
What was your first big break?
My first big break, I think, was doing Les Mis in 2016. That was my first time doing like a big commercial contract.
Big show.
Yeah. And I'd done the show before at the same theater that I'd done Miss Saigon in. But, because in the US, there's a big regional theater culture. And then there's different tiers of performing. So once you join the union equity, then you work at exclusively union theaters and, there's a pay tiers and all that sort of stuff. And I was not in the union yet in the US. And I had worked non-union jobs where I was getting paid like, $325 a week and we got put up in housing and all that sort of stuff. But this was Les Mis was my first sort of, I'm doing a commercial contract where I'm working with the original creative team of this production on a huge set, doing an international tour.
Right.
So I did Manila, Singapore, and then we did Dubai. And it was my longest contract so far. And yeah, and I covered Honduras as well. And I went on about 3 times opening weekend. And I was like, I can do a show 8 times a week. I can do this. That was my first realization that I have what it takes to do a massive job like this. But, you think you do that experience and you think your career is just going to immediately explode. Right. And I was unemployed after that for like, I think 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
So just because you've had a big break doesn't mean it's all going to cascade on from there.
Those first few weeks when you're doing Les Mis, is there a part of you where you felt like, man, I just don't want to bump into the furniture. I don't want to screw this up.
You don't want to be the guy that ruins something.
Yeah.
I think I was just on my best behavior.
Yeah.
And because I knew the show so well, I could also come prepared. I didn't give anyone a reason to yell at me or fire me or anything. I didn't have any of those experiences. But I think the thing on that job was like realizing it was a job as well.
Right.
For the first week or so, I'd be doing the show 8 times a week and I'm like, oh my God, this is the dream. And then you get to a realization that you're like, I have to get through the show today. And all I want to do is get through the show so I can have a cold beer afterwards. And yeah, so you still have days where it's like that. You try and remind yourself that this is the dream and that there would be so many other performers who would love to be in that position. And then so you have that sense of gratitude. But it is a job. And that's, I think, Les Mis is where I realized that dichotomy of things.
How comfortable are you seeking advice from your colleagues, if you seek advice?
I think I ask more for a lot of help. I think I am someone that really believes in, if you need help, ask for it.
Yeah.
So
did it take you a while to sort of get to be comfortable enough to get to that?
Not really, to be honest, because I remember in college, in conservatory, we had this class that was called Preparation for the Profession. So it was all about the business, and it wasn't about performing and acting and singing. It was just about the business side of performing. And I remember my professor was really, networking is made to be such an icky word, but it really is just showing up and doing your best work. And then if you've created that sort of relationship, then you can reach out when you need help.
Right.
So I would sometimes see a music director listed on a job that I wanted. And so I would send them an email and be like, I would really love to be considered for this. And that's the extent of asking for help. And if someone can help you get a job or do something well, they're going to. Just as, that would have been like 10, 12 years ago. And now I'm in a place where I feel like I could offer assistance and help to a young performer. And I would love that feeling. So I know where that comes from. I don't know so much about advice about like performing, like I wouldn't ask a castmate if like this choice was particularly good in a show. That's more for, I guess, your director and your music director, like people who are above peers in that sort of sense. But yeah, I'm always one who is like, if you need help, ask for it and you'll get it.
Is it strange to be in a place now where people may come up to you for advice or, any sort of guidance?
Yes. I just remember working with people who I looked up to and thought like, wow, I want to be like you someday. And for instance, one summer I did Hairspray at a place called Flat Rock Playhouse, and I was in the apprentice company. So there were about 12 of us who were mostly still in college or like about to graduate. And we were working alongside union actors, some of whom had been on Broadway. And I was like, this is amazing. This is like incredible. And now, 10 years later, I am doing something where people come up to me and they're like, I really respect you as an artist, or I admire you, or look up to you. And I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah.
I'm only 33. And then I'm like, well, I have had a career that I'm proud of. And if I can offer something to a younger performer, then I like, it's my honor to do so.
What's it like working with kids on stage?
I don't work as closely with the Tams as like Abby and Lawrence and the two of them do, you know. So and Louisa as well. I don't really have that experience. But I will say, like, it's nice to see how excited they are to be on stage, but also how good they are and well behaved. Like none of the Tams have done anything that is like stepping out of their character or anything. You know, I only had that one experience with them at the end, but I think maybe Abby and Lawrence would tell you that it is an exciting experience because you have to be really conscious about how you do the show and how you incorporate them into your character's relationship, and that there's sometimes 6 different ones in a city. And, you know, I have 2 Kims that I work with in a week, and we all have our nuances of how we do the show. And so for them to do 6 different shows with, you know, 6 kids, like that sort of finding those nuances and must be an exciting challenge.
Sometimes I wonder when I do see a big musical that does have, you know, kids that young, I wonder how much of this are they going to remember, because I don't know how much I remember when I was their age.
Yeah.
How much of this are they taking in? Do they realize they're in this massive theater in front of all these people?
Yeah. They're taught that, I mean, we really emphasize the point that it's pretend. Yeah. You know, that it's not real. And everyone has, all the characters have names for the kids. So like Kim is Kim Mummy and Tui is the naughty soldier. Yeah. And then, you know, like I'm Chris Daddy and John is Uncle John. Like they're all given names that are made to work with the kids. And again, like emphasizing pretend and just upholding, you know, positive reinforcement. Right. But I am sort of curious, like psychologically, how a show like this impacts them. You know, I mean, there would be Tams that are 40 years old now since the 35 years of doing Miss Saigon. I would be curious to know their experience today. But the Tams that we work with often memorize the show. Their parents will like post on their little Instagrams them singing through a song that they're not even in. Like you can tell they love it. Yeah.
Another thing I'm very impressed by is that they can actually memorize that young.
Yeah. I mean, some of them know the show back to front. Yeah. You know, like certainly the ones in Sydney, they were really invested in the show and learning it, and it's hilarious seeing what they get up to. But yeah, they do have that investment in the show.
You mentioned you went 9 months without work after Les Mis. When you finally do get a job again, does it take a while to sort of, I guess, settle back into, you know, the groove of things?
Yeah.
Being a performer again?
I think what's crazy is that as performers, you get the job, you get the call from your agent, and you're like, oh my God, I've booked the job. and then, you know, the cast announcement comes out in a few weeks or a couple months or so, and you're like, and then that's another big high because people are like, wow, good job, like, congrats, this is amazing. And then rehearsal starts to creep up and you're like, oh, I have to do the job now. Yeah. I have to actually do it. Yeah, I think what Miss Saigon has taught me is that I need to be sustaining more my capability to go into performance when something could pop up in an exciting way. You know, like being prepared vocally or yeah, I think just this experience has taught me that like your stamina as a performer is really important. But that rehearsal period, you have so much time to build it up.
Yeah.
But showing up prepared is the important part. Yeah.
When you get stuck into a show and you've been doing it for a while, are you good at staying present within the performance, or do you have a tendency to sometimes get through a performance and have no idea what the hell just happened?
I think being a principal now, I don't want to say like being in the ensemble is any of a different experience, but there are places where you're not as exposed, and so your mind may wander because concentration is a practice and a skill. But when you are so exposed as a principal performer, I think you sort of remind yourself that being present and in the moment is what's going to sort of move the audience in the best way. I haven't really struggled with concentration during the show. There are a couple points I think where I'm maybe less exposed, or that I will have done something differently, and then I'll have a few milliseconds of self-judgment and my mind wanders somewhere, and then I can snap back into what's going on. I think that's pretty natural. Like I think any other like lead performer would say that's par for the course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I've managed to, just in what I've told you about my sense that like there's freedom and consistency. I think that has really sustained my concentration.
Something I always used to fear was talking to people like this in this setting. And I've really, surprised myself that I've managed to get through, 100+ episodes of doing this in, talking to people like this. Because, the thing that I feared the most is now the thing that I'd love to do.
Yeah.
And this is a question that sort of just popped up in my head. This is the first time I'm asking this question. Is there something, in your career that you may have feared, and like now you look back and realize that, oh, actually the thing I feared is something I really love to do now?
I think there's just that fear of so many eyes being on you when you're performing. I think that's what makes me the most nervous, is that all these people, there are some days where I will go to work and do the show and I'm burnt out or something. And I'm like, oh, I have to have 2,000 sets of eyes on me today while I'm on stage. But I think it's overcome by, again, that appreciation from the audience, or that feeling that, when people come up to you at stage door and they're like, I've seen the show 3, 4, 5 times. Like we've had one guy that's seen Miss Saigon, I think over 30 times, not just our production, but that you're able to be a part of a piece that moves people in that way. You're able to, I think, overcome that fear, and also that sort of tamps down that sense that you're overly exposed, is that actually you're on a team with 42 cast members that bring a piece to life for the sole purpose of moving an audience. And it's a job well done when you've done that. Yeah. And one more thing about it is, I think if we get all technical about it, like I'm kind of a from the Meisner school of performing, where I try and put as much of my focus on my scene partner, and that sort of sheds that self-judgment for me. And I think that carries that sense of it just pushes that self-judgment away.
So something I've realized, the ambitions that I've had to do the things that I love, like, stand-up comedy, writing, now podcasting, I've realized that there are layers to what I want to do. So for the longest time when I was young, I thought the only thing to do was stand-up comedy. Then I realized, actually I prefer the writing side of things now. And I've sort of put stand-up comedy to one side years and years ago. And now I'm doing a podcast, and I think the first year was, you know, all about me becoming comfortable with talking to people. And now the second year, I'm, you know, it's like a reset. I'm learning how to be comfortable doing it on my own.
Yes.
But I'm now more worried about the content of the conversation. I want to make sure it's engaging. I want to make sure that, you know, that there's quality to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's layers. I've learned that there's sort of layers to these things. Like I have to learn that I have to be patient enough to
Yes.
to understand what will come with time. And I'm sort of curious with you, like, have you sort of realized that, like, there are layers to these things that I want to do that, okay, yes, it will take some time to, you know, get to where I am vocally, or, you know, get to a role I really want. It's going to take some time to get to that role I really want to do.
Yeah. I mean, patience has just been such a key to the progression of my career.
Yeah.
I think when I said earlier about that sense of like that liberation and releasing that feeling that like I have to go for everything, and yeah, that moment of realizing that things that fit me I'm fine with, and yeah, I think just that patience has always been sort of a key, and I don't know. I mean, this Miss Saigon has sort of opened a new place of where my career could go,
something
and
that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, and you know, if I think of other things that I'm interested in the industry, like I've always been interested in music directing, and is that something that will come about one day, or teaching, or
you mentioned teaching earlier.
Yeah, or I think at the moment right now I'm like, I quite like doing commercial theater because it's put me in a new place, and I think I would like to do, you know, one more contract so that I know where I'm going to settle in life, and then afterwards do like independent theater that's more creatively fulfilling. If you'd asked me like 10 years ago what my 5-year plan, 10-year plan was, I think I would have thought I was a lot earlier on to it than I was at that time. But all of that has been just that release has sort of led to where I am today.
Right.
And so if I take that reminder, then this sense of like planning and having a grip on what needs to be next, or what I think should come next, there is again that freedom in sort of letting it go and embracing the uncertainty.
Would you be okay with doing a prolonged contract here in Australia again?
Oh yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I love touring in Australia.
Yeah.
And the conditions are amazing here. Because I'm sort of tossing up, like, do I move back to New York, or
stay in Australia?
Do I stay in Australia? because the quality of life here is so good.
Yeah.
And you know, I've created a space for myself in the industry here, but you know, the Broadway dream is still alive, and and I have a network and a support system in New York, just like I do have here as well. But I'm sort of like, oh, is the sacrifice of the quality of living worth it? Or, you know, I don't know. So right now what I've sort of decided in the present is, once we finish Saigon, I'm going to stay in Melbourne and enjoy the summer.
Great.
And revisit the return to New York. I mean, it will probably happen in about March.
I had Ainsley Mellon on the podcast recently, and I did the podcast while he was still based in New York, and I asked him, you know, what would draw you back to Australia? And of course, you know, he's now in Wicked. He's had to replace Liam Head for the remainder of the Melbourne season, which was funny because at the time I asked him, what would draw you back to Australia? And he said, well, you know, I'd like to get to a point where I work both in New York and Australia. And now he's doing that.
Yeah.
So is that something like you look at and you're like, I want to work in both Australia and America?
Oh my God, I would love that.
Yeah.
You know, I would love it. I think it's hard because when you're in a different market, you're not really seen as being available in the other market.
Yeah.
And what was just so insane about Miss Saigon that I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever replicate this again, is that I booked Miss Saigon from New York. So I sent my first round tape, and then I moved on with my life as any other actor does. You send an audition and then you move on. And then they arranged like a live Zoom callback. And so I hired a studio in New York City and I did it live on Zoom. And I was like, wow, that went really well. But again, I don't know how they're going to hire me overseas. And then I got an email that was like, hey, we're flying you to Australia tomorrow because Cameron McIntosh is going to be in for you on Monday. And so that was just such a wild experience that I kind of am just like, that's never going to happen again. So, but, you know, I mean, Ainsley's worked his way to being a star. And so he's known in both spheres, both markets. And that's, if I think of people I look up to, it would be someone like that. That's really made their mark everywhere they go.
Right. And
one of my personal mottos as a performer is always leave a place with them wanting to work with you again. And Ainsley strikes me. I've done a concert with him, and he strikes me as someone who does that very well.
Yes.
So of course I would love to nurture the relationships I've had here that would invite me back. But there is that still unrealized Broadway dream that I have still to pursue, I think.
It took me the longest time to save up the money to go to New York when I was younger, because I am such a big musical theatre fan, and I thought Broadway was where it was, like in terms of the quality of the shows. And, you know, up until the point where I actually was able to go to New York, I was just seeing shows here in Australia. But when I got to New York and started seeing shows, I realized, oh, our shows over here, like they're just as good, if not better than the shows over there. So why am I, you know, why do I feel like why do I have that sense of FOMO? Like I'm missing out on something that we have, you know, quite well over here.
Yeah. And I think what is amazing about Australian performers is that because the jobs are so few and far between, when Australians get a job, they're incredibly tenacious in bringing the performance to life. Like, I mean, I just have learned so much from working with Australians on the rehearsal floor, on stage, like just the passion and the tenacity and the willingness to go 100% because you don't know when your next job is going to be is amazing to watch and be a part of. And you know, I've taken that because I've been back and forth now for the past 2 or 3 years, and I've taken that to the US, and it's really fulfilled me, and it gets noticed. Like people know Australian performers. They know that, especially when international creative teams come to Australia, they know what to expect and what they're going to get is going to be massive. And on the other side of the coin, I think there is a tendency for American performers to get complacent, and you see shows that have run for years and years and years, and because there's no ensemble members in the union, you can't really get fired. Like it's a run of play contract.
Right.
So you may see a show that's been running for years, and you may see ensemble members who you watch and you're like, this has turned into a bit of a job for you. You know, it's turned into something that you show up and you do. And that's not to discredit the mentality of American performers, but I think if you got Americans and Australians in the same room, there would be a lot of amazing learning. And you know, I think of amazing Australians who have gone to the US and joined Broadway companies. Like I would love to pick their brains about what their colleagues thought, you know, that they brought to the show.
Or Daniel Setter being one
exactly,
of them. Ainsley as well.
Yeah.
A controversial, I guess, I don't know how controversial it is really, but like a topic that sort of has come up before is using American artists to carry a show here in Australia. When I was talking to Blake Bowden about this, who was the first Australian to take on Elder Price in Book of Mormon full time, there's like a sense of, oh, well, you know, we have Australians here that can just do those roles just as well.
Yes.
Where do you sort of fall on that sort of topic of, you know, American artists coming to do a lead role here in a musical?
We have plenty of Australian artists who can do the jobs.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll say, like, as an Australian American, I'm not an import because I put the work in here.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if I were to be auditioning in Australia and I saw an American artist was imported to take the job that I was going for, like, of course I would be upset because, I mean, we have plenty of Australian artists who can do the jobs. And I think if you were to think back in the day of maybe we didn't have the artists, particularly like performers of color or performers who fit other specific spots that were needed in shows that came to Australia, we are still doing the work of inviting more of that within Australia, but it's certainly progressed in a way that we don't have to do that like we did before.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a testament to the work that has been done by those communities. But you know, there's no need these days to be importing American actors. Yeah. And I would only say that as someone because I think I auditioned for roles here, but I also had to sustain myself in between jobs here in Australia. I'm like, I've worked at that many Australian cafes and restaurants that I've hustled enough to call myself an Australian artist.
Yeah,
and I put the work in here. So, you know, I just don't think there's a need these days.
Do you have a favorite musical?
I've always loved Next to Normal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been the score is incredible, and it, you know, won the Tony for best score, and it's one of those comfort pieces that, well, I mean, comfort piece, if you think of the content, is a bit strange, but one of those pieces that I know that I can go back to and listen to when I want to be reminded of what inspired me as a performer. I mean, I loved Next to Normal when it came out in, I think, 2009, and that's when I started university. Yeah, it's an amazing score. It's been done a few times in Australia though, and I think I'm aging out of playing Gabe, but maybe Henry. Yeah, I love that show.
So you're 33 now.
Yes.
It's funny. I've had, you know, people on before who are getting, you know, into their late 30s, and they start to think, well, where do I fit? Like, what do I, you know, keep being a member of the ensemble? Do I keep doing, you know, do I keep being a swing? Like, they get into that sort of weird no man's land where they're not, you know, too old, but they're getting, you know, old enough where they start to question, well, where do I fit? Like, what's my, you know, big, you know, piece in this, you know, jigsaw puzzle? Do you sort of fear that when that will happen to you? Like, when you get a bit older, do you think, oh man, where am I going to fit in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I certainly don't think I'm going to be playing Chris anytime soon after this run. I think I've just caught myself at the right age. I would just say it's a shame that producers are not willing to invest in seasoned ensemble members and seasoned swings. Like in the US, and I think this is a massive point of difference, is that you will see ensembles made up of performers of all ages. Yeah. You know, every decade of life. And I think there's a tendency for producers to see that as more expensive, so we'll pay someone younger and fresh out of uni to do to be in the ensemble, and I, you know, it's hard to watch because I think you can really build a career out of being an ensemble member if only producers were willing to invest in that. I think that's one thing. The same goes for swings. I think being a swing is treated by producers in Australia as an entry-level position, when in fact in the US, swings are paid more than the ensemble because it is so rigorous and takes so much skill.
Right.
So that's what I'll say about that, is that I think we should be seeing performers of all ages occupying those roles and being paid what they're worth for that. And when I think of my personal experience, I think I've got a few more years in me of playing juvenile romantic leads. But I, when the time comes, I'll know it.
Yeah.
I'll be able to have that conversation with my agent and my manager, and it's not something that I fear just yet. And I feel like my voice is coming into a sort of new embrace of that seasoned, like legit contemporary, legit feel sound. And I'm confident in what I do well. So the age thing, while I am self-conscious about it sometimes, I think that conversation will come when it's time.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because I am a musical theatre fan. It is an excuse to sort of bring on people from the musical theatre world. And I love having members of the ensemble on, swings on, because I like shining a light on what they do, because 100%. It is so much hard work to be a swing. I didn't even know what a swing was when I started this podcast.
Yeah.
So I've become educated over time in what they do. So much hard work.
Yeah. I think of an experience where a swing that I was working on a show with came to work, and they weren't on that day. And one of the crew was like, "Aren't you supposed to be on stage?" And he's like, "I'm a swing." And then he was just like, "I didn't come to work to have to like explain my job to someone else, especially someone that works in the building." And oh my God, I could like totally understand that frustration, because it is, there is the wrong culture, frankly, about what a swing is in Australia. And I think they should be paid more. I think they should be revered, because, oh my God, I could never do that.
Yeah.
Especially these days. Like, I think not having done it in my younger years, like that would prepare me for something like I've covered, covered roles, but and I think it's also a shame that a lot of swings get burnt out to the point where like my next job, I want to be in one track or whatever. And I think their work should be just so much more rewarded and remunerated accordingly to what they bring. And that's really on the producers, that's on our union to make more noise about it. That's on us as performers to lift them up, because that culture here is not the same as in the US, for instance. I mean, I bow down to my swing colleagues, and when it's National Swing Day, I bring them a pastry. So it's so important.
When you go and see a musical, are you able to switch off that performer brain of yours? Are you able to just go and enjoy it for what it is, or do you pick it apart?
I don't know about pick it apart, but I think I'm more affected by the performances, maybe because we'll watch the set and be like, how did that get brought in, and how did they change costumes so quickly, and they're still able to like bang out this massive tune, and and like they're on stage the whole time. Like, how are they doing it? Would I be able to do that where I only left the stage like for 5 minutes the entire first act? I mean, that definitely comes in when I watch a show. I don't think I'll ever be able to switch off the performer brain.
Yeah. Man, this has been so much fun. Is this your first podcast, by the way?
No, I did one with Taylor Scanlon, who does The Dive.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's more about like speaking to younger performers and nurturing, whereas this has been really cool just to like to gas bag about the industry. So thank you.
I'm going to tell you, like, I was super nervous before coming in here today, because it's a new studio I'm trying out. It's the first time in a while that I've had someone here face to face. Yeah, because I've been doing a lot of Zooms. But yeah, and I was nervous, but now going back to the getting nervous before performing thing. Like, as soon as you get behind the mic, absolutely fine.
No, this has been lovely. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
I'll wrap up with a couple more questions.
Okay.
So I had one of your colleagues on from Miss Saigon, David.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, and he asked me to ask you, What was it like when he covered John for the first time?
Oh, he knows how I feel about this because this guy, we were just doing a show as normal, and then and I think there was a bit of COVID going around, like around Sydney, I don't know. And then we are literally all on stage at the 5, like about to start the show.
Yeah.
And poor Nick Afoa had tested positive for COVID, so they had to scoot him out of the building straight away. And at the 5-minute call, David Duquesne will be taking the role of John. And he hadn't teched before, like he just knew that, and I was like, what? Like, this is amazing, first of all, like so exciting. But the guy was like cool as a cucumber. I was shocked because, I mean, and he just knew everything start to finish. Oh God, it was amazing to watch because I obviously spent a lot of time with the character on stage. Yeah. So everything just came out right and rolled on, and it was like spectacular. That's what I mean when I'm like, covers and swings save the day. And I just like, but he knows how I felt because I went on my Instagram story and I was like, you guys, David Duquesne is the man.
Yeah. One last question. It's the question I always end on. What are the words of wisdom you live by?
Be persistent. Be prepared.
Yeah.
And always leave a place with them wanting to work with you again.
Yeah.
I said that one before, but being persistent is just about asking for help, going to the audition, like showing up, talking to who you need to, getting what you need. Being prepared is just like, if you know the lines and you know the words, there's nowhere you're going to fail. Yeah. And you go in to an audition and you just smash it. Like, I've only ever booked jobs that I was absolutely prepared to do. And then just leaving a place with them wanting to work with you again. Like, I'm so lucky that I have worked repeatedly with the same producers or the same theater company in the US or, because my reputation is important to me. And when you leave a place, with them thinking about a good job that you did, that only sets you up for further success. That's what I would just tell every young performer. It's like, there's a time and a place to have an issue and make a complaint. And otherwise, like, sometimes you have to develop the tools to roll through distractions or things that might deter you, and otherwise do your best work so that people see your best work and remember it, and you get brought back for even greater things.
One of the things that I've learned doing this by myself is learning how to be more present with someone. And because I used to have notes talking to people, and I think, like, I had Simon, there's a few things going on. Learn to take compliments, learn to be present, and like be more curious and talking to people, because I don't think in the first year, with all honesty, I think I was sharing the curiosity with my co-host. I wasn't fully curious about people, but now I've learned how to be more curious. I've learned how to be present, like, and take a compliment when you get it, when you get it, because I remember, I think it really sort of changed for me when I had Simon Burke on the podcast, and he gave me that compliment of, "Oh, it's very impressive that you didn't have any notes for that." Yeah. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that means something. Like, that's enough to sort of keep me going." I'm like, "Yeah, I got this." Yeah. Like, one of the biggest joys of doing this podcast is like having people on like yourself in like the musical theatre world, or comedians or writers that I look up to and think, yeah, if they can do it, there's no reason why I can't do it.
100%. Yeah.
Man, Nigel, thank you so much for doing the podcast today.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.